Hey,
Good
Joe.
evening. Good evening, Tim.
Hey, good evening, Joe. How you doing?
Just fine. Just fine. Um, recently someone passed away, Zig Brzezinski. And for the purpose of this show, because his last name is something I stumble over,
Yeah.
even worse than his first name, let's just call him Ziggy. How's that?
Ziggy, yeah.
Yeah, Ziggy. But we're talking about Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a diplomat and basically a handler of politicians. He's like Kissinger in that he's just everywhere. He's inside of all of these deals that basically are structuring the new world order. And so I just think that it's valuable to basically try to do an analysis of the individual because he was so influential. And he's also someone that I think was on the inside of the secret society. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But Tim, I wanted to ask you, what do you know about this guy, Ziggy?
Well, his curriculum vitae. Well, actually, he's Polish national, born in 1928, emigrated, I believe, to the United States via Canada, if I got that right.
Mm-hmm.
He studied, he has a PhD at Harvard. Of course, he was a national security advisor to Jimmy Carter from 1977 to 1981. A frequent Bilderberger. He went to the Bilderberger conference a lot. Not surprising. Of course, he was a member of the International Crisis Group with Wesley Clark and others. Sat on the board of many international corporations, which isn't surprising. He also taught at McGill University, which is interesting because that links to MK Ultra, perhaps. He went to Columbia. I think that's where he picked up the technocracy bug, perhaps, at Columbia, because that's where it started in the early 30s. Authored many books. Of course, the one that caught David Rockefeller's attention, allegedly, was this book, Between Two Ages, America and the Tectonic Age. America's Role in the Tectonic Age. He's been described sort of, I was listening to Jay Dyer gave a talk on him, and he said he was sort of the father of dystopia, sort of the successor to Carol Quigley, but without the faux Catholicism. Technocrat, and he sort of foretold the technocracy we're living on today in these books: the internet, weather control, electrical, ELF, radiation, electrical weaponry. These things controlling mind control, mass communication was a big part of technocracy. So that was his career. Of course, as you notice, a lot of the geopolitical maneuvering that we observed in the late 20th century came from his mind. America supporting the Islamic radicals in Afghanistan to lure the Soviets in to give them their Vietnam. So a lot of the stuff, a lot of the geopolitical wrangling regarding Eurasia, which is sort of built on the Mackinder Doctrine, the idea of controlling Asia, because to control the land mass, you have to control the world, these things. So that was kind of his thing. So that's kind of my take on Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about Ziggy that I think is most troubling is his idea that basically there needed to be techniques developed for inside of the modern communication techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. He was quoted as saying, in the technocratic society, the trend would be toward the aggregation of individual support of millions of uncoordinated citizens, but easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities exploiting the latest communication techniques to manipulate emotion and control reason. And bear in mind, this is someone who taught Obama. Obama purportedly was one of his students. So now you have a very clear technical advancement of the government during the Zabrinsky's era, where you start having more and more monitoring of the citizens. And he's really, in my opinion, the one who is at least most identifiable with this development, because he always, in the technocratic era, he basically, was saying that, you needed a new world order, which was a phrase that he actually would use, and this would have to be a technical, basically dictatorship. He, in my mind, when you look at the society that the MK Ultra researcher and programmer, administrator, Aldous Huxley, laid out, the dystopia in Brave New World, and then look at the quotes from Zabriskie about why, we need to have this technical development to help control democracy from getting too unwieldy. It's all just one big flow. It's just, these guys give, Huxley wrote novels and Zabriskie created speeches, but they're all in the same direction and they're all part of the same program. And at the end of it, the citizen is basically, seduced into sacrificing his or her freedom with the idea that it's a good idea, that this is really a way for a better kind of order, better kind of society to exist. And so I think that's really his legacy, is of a very clever sophist who, kind of manipulated the public with reasonable sounding arguments, which in fact were nothing more than just laying the groundwork for, this technological dictatorship. And I think that Zabriskie was kind of the public policy arm, and MK Ultra was sort of the behind the scenes technical development aspect, and then the movies, which worship technologic snooping. There's so many movies now that normalize. They'll have an individual and they'll have this group in some kind of electronic surveillance room, and they're getting his credit cards. They're getting every single financial transactions he ever did. They're looking at all of the videotape of his last 3 months that they get from all these things, and it just shows. The citizen just sits there and watches these movies, and this really is the way that we learn to be slaves, that we're being socialized. And so when you have Ziggy Brzezinski talking about this stuff, and he's, he does it with this kind of calm, smiling way, like, no problem, we just have to make a few changes to our culture in order to, get along with technology. But the fact is that, it ends up with the government having more and more power, and the citizen has no way to basically to fight back. So what do you have any thoughts? Because the question I have with Brzezinski, and I have with a lot of Lifetime actors, is what could have been done early on in his career? And I'll give you a parallel, is that I was thinking about Brzezinski today, and I was trying to compare him to someone, and the person I was actually thinking about was Gloria Steinem. And the reason is that if Steinem was stymied to some extent because she was exposed as a CIA agent, but okay, she nevertheless went forward and created a family-destroying brand of feminism, so she really wasn't stopped by the exposure. But at least there was an attempt, right? People tried to, expose her to the public. But what do you do with people like Brzezinski, or Henry Kissinger, or Clapper, or even, any of the John McCain,
Mm-hmm.
How do we get people to stop just relating to them in terms of, well, here are the words, it's Republican, it's Democrat, it's conservative, it's opposed to crime. I mean, how do we get people to start thinking about them just as agents of the secret society there, to do damage to your mind?
Well, I guess the chief obstacle there is just people's consciousness and awareness of what's going on in the world and how the world is really ruled or governed. You made the point that he came up with a lot of these ideas that were leading us towards this surveillance state, this technocratic control grid. A big part of that was creating the conditions that convinced people that these were, practical responses to genuine threats, organic, natural events occurring that weren't staged or manufactured to a certain extent. He was good at creating clashes of civilizations. And so that's what the Cold War was. It was a manufactured crisis, and so were the world wars of the 20th century. Geopolitical wrangling, the British Empire, the Anglophile Empire, these things, and the Cold War was a continuation of that. And these things would justify all these, surveillance, spy agencies, cryptocracy, and within that cryptocracy, there's no oversight, there's no control, there's no adult supervision, so to speak. So they can get away with anything.
We have no ally in the midst of that.
Yeah, there's nothing there, and we have to take their word for it. Agencies that that wage war by deception, by their own. That's their charter. Yet we're supposed to trust them. So I think the big part of that would be, how do you immunize yourself against, people like Brzezinski and the powers he represents? Again, the biggest obstacle, whenever I talk to, normal people.
Yeah, I know. I look for those guys too.
Normies. There are a lot of them out there. They're in my family. They read the newspaper. They watch, Fox News usually. My family's more Republican, so it's Fox News. Other families might be CNN or MSNBC or the networks. And they read the newspapers, or they read, the CIA-controlled political journals, whether it's National Review or the Standard, Weekly Standard. Where these are just rags for the oligarchs. They're stuck in this right and left paradigm. So they look at people like Brzezinski or Kissinger. They may be critical of them. They may see them as even as war criminals, but to a certain extent, that nevertheless they do look at them with a certain amount of legitimacy, because they're representing the American people. They're advising our elected representatives, and they're not handling our representatives. They're just advising them, and our elected representatives are taking the decisions. Well, you and I both know that's not true. Mm-hmm. So first is exposing them for what they are and who they represent. The gray eminence. These guys are like, they're not new. I think in Wilson's day it was Colonel House who did this type of thing. So the oligarchs have always had these people, sort of these lieutenants, to go out and recruit and control the political class to give us a veneer of democracy or rule of law. So we assume the system is legitimate and we accept it. So we accept these experts. We accept this idea of Brzezinski coming up with an idea to foment a civil war in Afghanistan that takes the lives of millions of people. It's okay because we have to take down the Soviet Union, but no one understands that the Soviet Union was created by the West in order to create that dialectic, so we could have all these wars, all these conflicts, all this psychological trauma, so we can be more easily controlled and constantly harvested, constantly taxed, constantly robbed blind. But we don't know it because we see it as legitimate. And that's the biggest thing, is just getting people to see the whole picture, just how illegitimate, how corrupt the whole system is. And if you can do that, then these guys sort of lose their veneer of legitimacy.
Yeah, that's right. Once people start just considering the possibility that they're fake, the individuals lose a tremendous amount of power. And so that would be, the thing that I think should be done early on in these, when you can, like with Brzezinski, and I think he was an advisor to 6 presidents. So you can see there's something special about him, that he has a transcendent power inside of the secret society, like David Rockefeller or Kissinger, or, the guys who just last forever inside the media as, representatives of one political party or the other. But I think that the reason they have the longevity is that they're basically handlers. And so the question is like, well, how do we expose that? And, there just isn't really an easy way to do it. With Steinem, there was the dramatic outing of her CIA identification. And this was completely contrary to, supposedly being a feminist and a writer,
Mm-hmm.
So she was just tarred. Even then, of course, there was a way for her to go sideways for a while and keep going forward with her plan. But with Brzezinski, because he's actually inside the government, you can't really tar him by saying, well, he's engaged with CIA and things like that, because that's just normal trade.
Yeah.
With Brzezinski, I would look for, and this is the kind of, this would be something I'd like to know if anyone in our audience can help us with, because I've had some really good luck with this approach. This is the hive mind concept, Tim. Is that what I'm looking for is some connection between Brzezinski and Ewan Cameron. Cameron was at McGill in the early 50s when Brzezinski was there. And I am betting that Brzezinski had been tapped very early by the agency, by the secret society, right? They would have had him identified as someone inside when he was in college. So by the time he came to the U.S., with his purported, Polish aristocracy background, which I think is completely fake, but he's already been tapped. And so the fact that he goes to McGill is very interesting to me, because that one was when when Cameron was doing the most, really, vicious and crazy MK Ultra experiments. And so what I'm wondering is if anyone has, some kind of evidence that the two were somehow involved at that point. That would really see this. If we could find that, then we would have a way that we could go back and pry open his whole secret identity. Mm-hmm. Because I'm convinced that Brzezinski is a lifetime actor. So we can get at it. We can expose it if we can find associations that are completely inappropriate and unusual, but are to individuals that we know are inside, basically the secret society, like Ewan Cameron.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping, is that someone will, and when we post this discussion, or perhaps even a listener now, that they'll go to your website and make a comment.
It's it's an obvious avenue of investigation because of what he advocated in America, between between two ages, this transition from industrial to technocratic age, and the role of mass mind control, which was a big part of MK Ultra. MK Ultra was, not just drugs, but it was also the introduction, culture creation, and also mass mind control through high tech. People like Delgado and his film of him stopping the bull and these things. The funny story of the cat with the... You heard a story about the cat?
No. What was that?
They had put brain implants on a cat so they could actually control a cat. Let a cat go and control its motions. They spent like a couple $1 million on the program. And the first day they tested it out on the street. It ran out in the street and got run over by a car. So... $2 million. I think a lot of MK Ultra was simply people with too much free time and too much of other people's money. That's a huge part of it, right there.
Yeah, and I also think that the actual, the reality of MK Ultra, the thing that they were most interested in doing, was never exposed.
Yeah,
you can only get at it analytically. They have this whole Manchurian.
I think we'll live in it today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But really, it was social destruction.
Yeah,
and with the idea of making a society that was very easy to control, which of course led to the breakup of the family, the ethnic neighborhoods, and even like heterosexual identity. Mm-hmm. They just atomized into every way that they could, basically European American culture. Mm-hmm. They had a particular reason for wanting to do this. So, of course, and to be fair, they also went after the African Americans in a big way. They actually, demolished that culture as well. But that's why when you look at Cameron's experiments, which have no there's no possible way that this psychic driving, is related to some kind of, Cold War issue. It's just insanity, and it just reflects a society that wants that first of all, that has no respect for certain classes of humans. I mean, that they'll literally use them as lab rats. Mm-hmm. So that's the most important, phenomena for the citizen to know about MKUltra.
Another aspect of MKUltra is that it gives the lie or portrays the false dialectic that were given throughout the 20th century. Is we hear the story of MKUltra and the use of paperclip Nazis working alongside so many prominent Jewish scientists.
Yeah, that is really, and again, this goes right into that whole question, because Ewan Cameron was the individual who brings us our understanding, our cultural understanding of the German people. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was in charge of basically German national psychological, health following World War II, and then he made just completely insane statements about the nature of the German personality.
Yeah, there's something inherently defective to the German psychology.
Yeah, that it was really and this was, and I've mentioned that there is just that this is the biggest red flag I've ever seen analytically, because he's the individual. Cameron is the individual who actually performed the most insane and heinous experiments on humans that have ever been conducted. And then he's the one who is giving us our information about the Nazis and the German people. I mean, there's just something so wrong about that it screams, for more research. And that's why with Ziggy, and Ziggy's, talking all the time about, we've got to get this new world order kind of technically in shape. I see, Tim, it's just one big society with one program. There's lots of different aspects of it. But if we can early on in people's careers connect them and then expose them, it's sort of like Daniel Pinchbeck, the current LSD advocate. Mm-hmm. His mother was obviously involved in the program because she was, I believe, Kerouac's girlfriend at one point. And then she went on to be the editor of Ms. Magazine, who actually was Michelle Wallace, who wrote Black Macho, really wrote the book. Mm-hmm. And then it was edited by Steinem. So now her son comes into existence. And remember, with Dave McGowan, we can see that there are these family connections, right? The rock and roll phenomenon in Laurel Canyon was, and so often these individuals were the sons or daughters of intelligence, military intelligence officers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all have intel or military pedigree.
Yeah, right? Intel backgrounds. And McGowan, he just said this is impossible. It just couldn't be circumstance, and he's right. But the phenomena that's important for the citizen to recognize is that it's generational. So that's why if we can use that principle, to like get at people like Daniel Pinchbeck and head them off early on in their careers, for example, if it's like you have the band manager of the Grateful Dead, and his name is Hank Harrison, I believe. Yeah, I think it's Hank Harrison. So I've actually had communication with him. And then when I ask him serious questions, he disappears. But at one point, he and I were in communication. And so he's actually the one who exposed the Grateful Dead as being Freemasonic. I mean, as though you needed someone to say this. But he was asked by a researcher why all of the early pamphlets for the Grateful Dead are just obvious Freemason symbols. And he said, well, it's easy to answer. We're all Masons. So there was the answer. But then he was the daughter of Courtney Love, the Whore of Babylon singing, person who then married Kurt Cobain.
The father of Courtney Love.
Yeah, he was, that's right. He's the father of Courtney Love. But you see, Courtney Love should have been headed off before she could do a lot of damage. See what I'm trying to get at is that if we use these principles now that are out there, we can when someone like Courtney Love comes into culture with the background that she has as someone who is coming from a Masonic family that has been engaged in cultural destruction, then people can try to expose her. They can actually write articles and alert the public that, wait a second, we've got a real, a bacteria has come into our midst, and we've got to identify it and keep it from hurting us.
Yeah, she, well, according to John Potash, the author of Drugs as a Weapon Against Us, the Courtney Love attended the daycare center at the Presidio.
Yeah.
Base when they were having all those...
Child of the Presidio.
Yeah, sex scandals. And she was a drug mule and a prostitute for CIA and NATO generals in her youth, like in her early teenage years, from what I understand. And then later on, she was very influential in like pushing heroin in the music scene in the grunge scene in Seattle, Washington, in the late '80s and early '90s. So she's there to corrupt the music scene again, sort of to co-opt it. So you have that template again, making itself apparent there. So she was an agent, agent of destruction, sent in there to do that. And of course, the suspicions swirling around her and the death of her husband, Kurt Cobain. Where he injects more heroin than anyone's he could possibly take, and then shoot himself with.
That was always. I've always, maybe we should at some point do a show about that, because I've always thought that, the punks and then the grunge movement were just obvious, mind control programs from the secret society to continue to the basement of Americans' youth. And so when you look at Cobain, and particularly I've seen some people who've done some analysis of like the symbols and his lyrics, he sure looks like a Lifetime actor. Mm-hmm. He looks as dirty as hell to me. I'd like to do some more analysis in it, but it's particularly obvious to me because his wife was the daughter, of Hank Harrison, who was a Mason that helped bring out the Grateful Dead. Helped with the acid tests. He just couldn't be more filthy. And we see there the generational phenomena that McGowan pointed out. And so when she goes on into culture and then has this band and ends up married to Cobain, then see this is kind of the citizen learning a new way of kind of dealing with reality, of putting the understanding that the government is malevolent, it's organized, it uses weaponized anthropology against the citizens, and it creates cultural icons to do this. With that information, then you have someone like Courtney, Love coming forward and marrying Cobain. Cobain should have been under scrutiny from the very beginning.
Yeah, the whole idea of the popular music or rock icon is suspect in my book.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fact you build someone up like a Christ-like figure so you can kill him, and then all of a sudden have this trauma in the general population. Even some commit suicide over the fact that he had died. And, what's that all about? The fact that someone could be so vulnerable to base their life.
I think that I actually think that a lot of these deaths are faked. I think that, for example, I'm almost positive Jim Morrison's death was faked. And I think these are done to basically create overdoses as a heroic, behavior. Mm-hmm. They're basically encouraging young people to commit suicide with using the Lifetime actor all the way to the end, and then having them drug overdose, and then the people who are being influenced by the rock icon then have that as imprinted, as part of their personality.
Yeah, and don't fear the Reaper, baby, as Lewis of Coulter.
Don't fear the Reaper. Jack yourself up with heroin, and then you're just like Morrison. And someday we can talk about it. I did a long analysis of Morrison's death once, showing that it couldn't possibly have been real, that there was other things going on. The main thing was his father was decommissioning the Bonhomme, which was a battleship at exactly the time Morrison supposedly died. And, Ben Franklin, the Freemason in Poor Richard's Almanac has like a lot of, typology that is related to the secret society. And so I knew that dates were very important. And I don't want to go into because it's such a segue from Brzezinski. But, the thing is that, his book, and the key book to me with Brzezinski is, Between Two Ages, the technochronic, am I saying it right? Era, I think, yeah.
It's technochronic. Technochronic? Yeah, technochronic.
I don't know how to pronounce technotronic?
Technotronic, that's it, yes. Yeah,
okay. Anyway, he talked about basically a scientific dictatorship.
Yeah, and that's what David Rockefeller's attention.
Flat out. And this comes out, if I'm right, I think it comes out in 1970, 71.
70,
so
I think, yeah.
It's perfectly plugged in with the youth culture, the MK Ultra phenomena. I mean, it's ideally timed to provide, a kind of scholarly veneer to basically the, what is being started by MK Ultra, by the merry pranksters with the personal computer.
Yeah, he's not predicting; he's prescribing.
Yeah. But you see, good point. I think that this is actually being done just to normalize it. Yeah. I think if you have someone who puts an idea out there that they're actually going to bring about, and the person brings it out well, is this really a good idea? There's some dangers, but this. Just starting the conversation is what it moves it down the road to eventually, look at how basically transsexual culture was hoisted upon us.
Yeah, that's like Toffler, right? Isn't that Toffler did? Yeah, in his books.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in that book he talked about how in Between Two Ages he talks about that there's going to be the death of religion or God, death of nationalism. The death of culture, and all we're going to have is global consumerism, all in the name of freedom, free trade, these things. And this breaks down again, like I said, these firewalls that civilizations may have to this globalist monoculture that the oligarchy want to impose. So all this, and the only thing people are going to have is this consumerism. That we see that today. And this is implemented or instituted through. Well, his ideas, these NGOs, whether it's USAID or National Endowment for Democracy, or now it's Soros's group, the Open Society. These things, how they go in and they will undermine local cultures, local town. Just go in and inject. Neoliberalism into these foreign countries in the name of democracy, and democracy has always been the oligarch's tool for tyranny.
Yeah.
It's the cover they use, and you see it played out in the Ukraine. We see obviously we've seen it, all throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and this also subsequently creates this migration crisis, which then puts pressure on the European Union, the European countries. And that's why you have this character, this guy Peter Sutherland, who's talking about how mass movement of people, the free movement of peoples, is basically the future, and that we can't have borders anymore. We can't have ethno-nation states.
Right.
And we must tolerate mass immigration. It's just interesting that Sweden, country like Sweden, a perfect example of sort of a homogeneous society. They began taking in refugees in the 70s. And that's just when these areas became to be increasingly destabilized in the 70s and 80s, so much now that they're taking in, a country of 9 million people are taking in close to 1 million refugees. That's very, upsetting to the local culture. And they told they must do this.
I just want to help. You just have a question. Does he also criticize Israel, for the idea of a Jewish state, which is becoming more and more normalized? I'm just wondering if he actually then, applies the same criticism to that nation.
I never heard him utter a criticism of Zionism or the Israeli state per se, but he did he did clash with Zionists or the neoconservatives because he thought they were too crude in their ways of achieving the New World Order. So much so that it attracted criticism and hurt the overall mission. That was his criticism of the neoconservatives. He preferred the neoliberal approach, which is soft power. He thought their approach was too crude.
Yeah. Well, I'd sure like to have some of these guys, because Europe is under all of this pressure to be multicultural, right? Which basically it means evaporation of culture or genocide of culture, right? Multiculturalism. It's just an oxymoronic mind control expression. But Europe is receiving it because a lot of people are resisting, Muslims being brought into countries that have ethnic traditions. But I'm curious about, at the same time you have this proclamation that's becoming more and more clear that Israel is a Jewish state, right? I think Romney used the expression. And, it's a very controversial expression back in the 50s when you first had, basically the nation of Israel, which is still unclear because I don't think they've ratified the Constitution yet. But when you had the establishment of what the Zionists thought of as Israel, it wasn't going to be a Jewish state, or at least that's how it was laid out to the public. There was going to be another state or some kind of relationship with the Palestinians. But now, and Israel itself was being touted as democracy, with the idea of multiculturalism, with the idea that all people would be able to participate. But then suddenly this changes. And then you get this Jewish state stuff, and that's why when I listen to Sutton, I always wonder. I go, okay, well that's let's good for the goose, good for the gander. Let's hear your criticism of the Jewish state, but I'm not hearing it. I don't hear it, so I'm curious about that. Why not?
Well, it's could be because that's that is sacrosanct. You always hear this thing: Israel has a right to exist. Now, I don't know if a state has a right to exist, in and of itself. I don't know. Now, it's a practical matter to exist, I suppose. But does the state have a right to exist? And does that mean that prior to its existence?
Yeah, I mean, it's very strange.
Yeah,
I don't get it. I mean, I just and the reason I bring it up is just because, I just think that that's something that Europeans should use as an example of a culture that actually, or an ethnicity or religion, whatever you want to call it, that has the right to exist, and therefore we're just asking for the same thing. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's the whole thing, where I think it was Wesley Clark, a former NATO general, who played a big part in the destruction of Yugoslavia and the bombing of Serbia in the 90s, who now is cashing in on that destruction. He said that the age of the European ethno-state is over. I don't know who appointed him to be in a position to declare that, but he said it.
I remember that, and I was shocked by that because I thought, well, heck, this is the time when it's needed the most. I mean, they're having family. I mean, all of the problems we have, they're having. Yeah. Their population is in rapid decline. They're basically being buffeted by immigrants that are being, brought in from laws that are being created by the EU, which in many cases they're unelected individuals who are, creating these foreign policies. Seems to me this is really when you need a European ethnicity, all these different ethnicities. The value of them is never, in my mind, clearer than what's in looking at what's these people are facing. Well, why wouldn't this be a great time for a regeneration of ethnic pride in Europeans? I don't understand, Tim. I'm confused.
If you espouse ethnic pride, obviously it means you're Hitler. That's so that's the distinction. It's obvious what they're doing. They're destroying European. They're trying to destroy Europe as it is or as it was. They're trying to destroy.
They're trying to destroy the European.
Yeah, the European for some reason. Yeah. And I mean, it's obvious what they're doing. Just recent. The spate of terrorism that we've seen in Great Britain recently, coincidentally, just around an election. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I mean, if you go into North Africa and Middle East and you foment a civil war and you bomb these countries and you create this exodus, these migrants that come to Europe and they flood these European countries, there's going to be problems. There's going to be disruptions and all these things. And it doesn't take much for an intelligence agency to go in and pay a few, yahoos or pay a few radicals or idiots or morons to start carrying out attacks.
Like Libya.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely transparent that this was, basically CIA and NATO creating some terrorists, that went in and created chaos. And, then.
The Libyan fighting group, which, guy who ran it was one time being tortured by the United States, I think out in the Philippines or something, or Diego Garcia or something. Then he became head of the Libyan fighting group who spearheads the ground attack in Libya while NATO, does its part, supposedly, responsibly to protect. Of course, this is just at a time when Gaddafi, is talking about establishing an African currency based on gold, and his oil is. The sanctions are being lifted, so his oil might flood the market, which might affect some people's, investments in other areas because it's light sweet crude. So there's all that. You also have that. With WikiLeaks, we have the Blumenthal Hillary Clinton correspondences in her emails talking about the gold, the $7 billion. It's like in gold that they're eyeing.
It's just like it's basically they're looting.
Yeah, it's assets.
A nation. I mean, that gold should never have even been in discussion by foreign politicians. I mean, that belongs to the people of Libya, for heaven's sake.
This is the BS here, because behind all of Brzezinski's highfalutin geostrategy talk, this is what it's all about. It's about asset stripping. It's about piracy.
Yeah, that's right. And and that's why when I'm just gonna I have some of my favorite Brzezinski's quotes here. And my favorite one is he talks about the trilateral plan. Remember that little gem? Mm-hmm. He goes, regionalization is in keeping with the trilateral plan, which calls for a gradual convergence of East and West, ultimately leading the goal of a one world government. National sovereignty is no longer a viable concept. Now, this is exactly the kind of concept that is being used to mind control Europeans into accepting the EU's immigration of unemployed young Muslim males into Europe on a mass scale. Mm-hmm. Right? National sovereignty, which means ethnicity, is no longer a viable concept. It's not even viable. It's not even viable.
But a global
gradual convergence of East and West, and then there's going to be a one world government. Now
that's not new. I mean, that's what the Reese Committee exposed in the 50s.
Yeah,
that beginning of the 20th century, there was talk about this using wars to traumatize, collectivize the country. Then throughout the Cold War, this attempt to meld the two systems together. So that's what we're getting. So we have trilateralism is the same thing, just repackaged.
Yeah. Okay. So we're heading toward no more national sovereignty. Here's Zabrinsky's thought on privacy. It goes, the technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen. Now, this was written in 1970. Wow. What a prophet. Isn't it incredible that he could actually see that in 1970? And so, I would say that he's not a prophet. He's simply part of the plan, and everything that he is putting forward is a kind of very sophisticated propaganda to normalize these ideas. Even if he's bringing them up like Huxley does in Brave New World, right, where he's saying, this could be a problem, but let's look at this. Let's look at the world like it's going to be, because we know it's going to be like this, and then people, they just start to accept it. And the next thing you know, Huxley is working with MK Ultra doctors to basically bring about the Brave New World. And then you can see that, wait a second, he wasn't warning us at all. This was just part of the plan to bring it about. It was just clever, you know. And the same thing applies to Ziggy when he talks, when Brzezinski doesn't talk about this stuff. If you read the book, which I did years ago, the thing that struck me is that the guy is just a cold fish. He just talks about this stuff like, well, that's just how it's going to be. Don't complain. You know, you're going to be under surveillance every second of the day. The elites will be in control of everything. Well, wait a second. How about a little rebellion? You know, what about we need a way to destroy the elites, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, when you look at what he writes so dispassionately, you have to ask you, well, why, if this is going to occur, isn't this guy who supposedly is part of the American democratic government, why isn't he saying, you know, we've got to rebel right now? I'll meet you, you know, at the mall and I'll bring some weapons and we're going to hunt the elite down, right? Where's that?
Well, it's important, I think, that Brzezinski, you know, was a foreigner. He was Polish. So was, you know, Kissinger being German, from Eastern Germany, I believe. I think that's important. And they both kept these weird accents as they're advising our presidents, you know, the New World Order. And I can't do Brzezinski, but, you know, it's like, and so I can just see him laying out these plans in these weird accents. And you think someone in the room would go, what's going on here? I got Dr. Strangelove here telling me.
Yeah, you know, and even Dr. Strangelove himself in the movie. Yeah. I've always thought that this was like just kind of mind control. What they do is they put these, you know, purported intellectual giants with foreign accents as basically the creator of foreign policy, and in some cases even domestic policy. And this just doubles the intimidation for, you know, the gee, you know, common Americans, we can't really do much. I mean, even like, you know, at the high level, you bring in these accent guys, and so we're just, you know, they just see themselves as inferior. Yeah,
it's simply above my pay grade, the question.
It's above my pay grade, you know, and I don't have the foreign accent and all kind of like 15 degrees, you know, and so it's, which are all completely insane and basically have the, you know, all they do is just add alphabets and intimidation at the back. It's sort of like Noam Chomsky. God, I just can't stand that guy. I mean, he's such a liar. But he's a classic example of you know, of how you know, because he doesn't have an accent, but he almost does.
Yeah,
it's close. You know, it's close. I don't know what his background is. He may have come from another country, but he's like William F. Buckley. He has so much affectation that it's almost like an accent. But he just has this, and Brzezinski is the same way. You just get the sense when he's talking, like, gee, he really knows a lot. He has a lot of, you know, information. You don't really want to do much analysis of the information because it finds out that there's just hot air there.
Yeah.
But he creates this kind of intimidation, which then with Chomsky, he talks about 911 like, you know, weird things happen, like buildings fall symmetrically at free fall speed. This stuff just happens after the fact. You know, anybody can go back and you look at anything and find a few weird things. So it's impossible to have a conspiracy. So just like move on to other stuff, right? Just completely lying his head off. Well, Brzezinski is really the same thing, though, right? Because when he talks about, you know, there's going to be, you know, the elites ruling through a technocratic controls and stuff. I mean, why? Why does this have to be this way, Tim? When you make that statement of fact, aren't you just basically talking your book and using propaganda? Mm-hmm. Why do we have to put up with that crap?
Well, it goes back to who he's working for, and obviously, if this is the world that they envision, and they can't have a healthy, normal world. You know, people with thriving, big families, educated, you know, productive work, because that's not slavery, and their vision is slavery. They never dropped the idea of slavery. I don't think they just converted it to wage slavery. And the most effective form of slavery is a slavery where the slave doesn't even know he's enslaved. And that's the situation with a lot of people today.
That was pointed out by Goethe, the German Freemason monster. Again, just doing it as a kind of, accolade of how sophisticated the secret society has been in controlling.
Well, that's because revolution has always been from above. It's always been a tool of the oligarchs.
Yeah.
So that's another trick is.
Yeah, it's basically to wipe out. In the case of like the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution, they just wanted to wipe out European leaders and put in these. Like in the case of the Bolsheviks, most of them aren't even Europeans, or a great many of them are Jews. In the French Revolution, you end up with Napoleon. Well, who in the hell is Napoleon? You always see him with his one hand, he's a Mason, for God's sakes. His whole family's Masonic. So who in the hell is Napoleon, right? And with Napoleon, then the next thing you know, you're marching across Europe and suddenly millions of Europeans are dying. And what's in back of it? Well, there's a principle of liberty, fraternity. There's these weird principles. And on the other side, then, you have the same thing when the Bolsheviks destroyed the Tsar and his family. And the next thing you know, you're, like tens of millions of people are dying all over the place. And it's all this workers' paradise that's going to come in the future after we kill everybody. It's like we talked last week about, Lincoln preserving the Union by killing everyone. Yeah, that was the Union is still in existence, Tim. It's still there. By God, they're all dead, but the Union is still there. The Union is great. Let's the battle hymn of the Republic starts to play in the background, and the next thing you know, you've got a gigantic marble statue of Lincoln.
Well, and we're told that through the flames of war, a new nation was forged, a stronger nation. And all this,
because they got rid of everyone they didn't want. People just don't understand that war is being waged against particular populations, and both sides are involved in the population reduction. They just get control over these organizations, and as soon as they do, they just ram them into each other.
It was pointed out to me that the slogan of the French Revolution, liberty, fraternity, equality, they're all contradictory.
Yeah.
But it's a slogan, so it works.
Right, which of course was never even offered to the French people. Liberty? No. What was that? They couldn't even vote for anybody. The military took over, and the next thing you know, you got Napoleon, for God's sake. So it was just, the whole thing was ridiculous. They just executed a bunch of European aristocrats because they didn't want them around. And, you have the Jacobins and, all of the Robespierre and all these people with weird backgrounds. You don't even know who in the hell they are. And they're suddenly, saying, well, we need Napoleon. And the next thing you know, everybody is like marching, across Europe in some weird destruction of, population to just all die in the Russian winter. And then, gosh darn it, Tim, Hitler does the same thing. Same damn thing. Isn't that weird?
Well, you needed the Napoleonic age to ignite German nationalism. So dialectic being played here, right? And so
you made me laugh.
Yeah, whenever the French complain about Hitler, I say, well, you created him. You sent in Napoleon.
Yeah. Well, it's just the unseen hand in back of all of this has to be exposed, because to me, I do not believe that the politicians can be that stupid. This has to be organized in some way. Let's go. Napoleon.
Same with the economic calamities. That's what's funny things, whether it's the Great Depression, the collapse of the German bank, the Credit All-Stock Bank in 1931, which led to the depression of Germany, led to the rise of the Nazis. These things, the whole system of international central banking was designed to prevent these crashes, yet they let them happen. And critics of these central banks, particularly what I'm thinking about right now, is Charles Lindbergh Sr., who said that from now on depressions and bust will be engineered. And lo and behold, it happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
And each time you get an incredible concentration of economic power with each crash. It's a pump and dump scheme. And then we're told, it just happened because no one really knew what was going on. They made these
It's
mistakes.
history unfolding.
Yeah.
It's just history unfolding. We just had no idea. Wow.
You don't know if you inflate the U.S. dollar to prop up the English pound that you're going to create an asset bubble. I mean, I understand that. They didn't understand that.
Right.
But this is all done under the veneer of, the British trying to preserve the English pound, all these things. So we get the Great Crash, Great Depression, and of course from that you get all the consolidation that occurs, the stealing of the gold, these things, and then of course World War II, which is another form of asset stripping and concentration of power. It's, yet, as you say, just history unfolding. It's just one accident after another. And
it's just incredible, and it's just the darn thing is the same people keep winning. And you just go, wow, they're so lucky. It's just incredible, all these billionaires.
But regarding Brzezinski, one thing I do find interesting is the fact that, here he is. He's this advisor to half a dozen presidents. He's a member of the CFR, the Trilateral Commission. He's also sitting on the board of several international companies. And I think that's kind of like, that's the system, because when we talk about the New World Order, we kind of already have it, because it's Goldman Sachs, it's JP Morgan, it's McDonald's, these things. It's the banking system that harvests humanity every day through its debt-based money system. It's already here for people. It's already here. You're being robbed every day. You're being robbed through the insurance industry, through the medical industrial complex, through the university college complex that promotes debt slavery for fraud.
Preach, brother. Preach.
I mean, you don't see this. It's ridiculous. Yet people,
they can't get it.
They're within that system. They don't
all
see
of this debt, which basically is all the debt-based money, right? The interest that's paid on your credit card, your home, your car. Just remember that the person that is issuing the credit hasn't got zip. He just has the power to issue the credit.
Yeah. Why can't I do that?
Why can't Tim and Joe have this power? And you know what, Tim? I tell you what. You want to buy a company? No problem. Here's $1 trillion. You only 0.25% do it in like 20 years.
That's how the system works. And
then you know what? I need some money too. So why don't you do it back to me?
Yeah.
And so they get to own every single business in America, because they can give one another. The tribe can give each other money at cheaper rates than the profitability of any corporation. Mm-hmm. Right. If the corporation is making 3%, they can borrow money at 0.5%, and they can arbitrage the difference.
And that wealth is not based in any production.
It's not based on anything. It is just based on, basically on a kind of dictatorship from banks.
Just like when I talk to people about the banking system, I ask them, where do they get the money to loan you to buy the house? Where'd they get that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think they had it sitting in a vault? That someone saved this money, they deferred consumption, and now they're taking the risks, that they deserve some sort of compensation.
A tidy little business, well run.
Yeah. Well, no, it's they create the money out of thin air, so they're loaning you money they didn't have prior to the loan. So by what right do they claim interest? What right do they claim anything?
Exactly.
They don't have consideration. It used to be there's a thing called consideration alone. When you loan someone money, the money you loan them is consideration. There's no consideration here, but people have become adjusted to it, because that's the way the system works. There's
no capital risk. The credit the credit that the banks give you comes through the discount window, typically of the Fed. It's just an electronic transfer that goes straight from one creator of nothing to another bank, who then passes along the nothing to you, which now pops up as a loan.
Which the difference is they're paying 0.0001%, and I'm paying 8%, 9%, 50%.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. That's the problem, is that they can arbitrage the difference, and this is why America has gotten poorer. Mm-hmm. This is why, because they are able to both deflate the value of the currency with this approach, and they can also strip wealth through interest payments on capital that is only imaginary. And they end up with all of this wealth. The population, our wages obviously are not keeping up with inflation. They now have the family, or the relationships, because they're often not even families, have both partners working, the male and the female.
Well, that's freedom. She's liberated.
And that's your freedom, right? Is that you have the freedom for both partners to work, to make interest payments on money that never existed, except when it becomes debt to you.
But don't sweat your depressed wages, because there's always a credit card offer coming in the mail.
Yeah, that's right. And you've got your iPhone, so you can stay in touch with other slaves. And so this is the damn problem, is that they are unified, and Brzezinski is like a political face that is obviously unified with the anthropologic faction, with the mind control, mm-hmm. which is obviously just another part of the banking family structure. I mean, mm-hmm. It's all of these things are just completely related. They're all organized, highly organized, and they're organized against us.
Yes, we're being harvested every day.
We're just being harvested. Yep,
every day. So
and we the worst part of it is the facade of democracy. You get to vote for a black-faced neocon or a female neocon mm-hmm. or a white pussy-grabbing neocon. Just take your pick.
Yep.
It's a democracy, Tim. You can just take your darn pick. The tempest in a teapot, with the election, which Brzezinski, because he was still in play, was actually commenting on. Mm-hmm. On like how, well, Trump would mean this and Hillary would mean this, It's just complete nonsense. Just tip to stern rubbish. I mean, it's just preposterous. It's so sad that people think that there was some kind of democratic process taking place, because they'd gotten the drama of the puppet show up to such a high level.
Yeah.
The feminists were hating Trump, and the Make America Great Again white male was hating Hillary. Look, folks, it's just one cluster of people, and they're highly organized. They just put these different people out there so that they make you pay attention to the puppet show, the mm-hmm. so-called election. So Brzezinski's dead. Thank God. If they would only all die, but they won't. In fact, they just seem to linger. One thing I notice about these guys is they linger for, like Kissinger. I mean, Kissinger should have died of old age during the Vietnam War. He was in World War II. What is it, about 150?
He's 93 and he's still jet.
I mean, it's just beyond belief. I think he's about 100. I think he's he's probably 120. They keep these guys alive. They must have some medical.
Well, I think he might be 93, but rumor has he has a heart of a 15-year-old. Literally, no.
He does. I'm sure. And of course, they're that the elite are just organ harvesting like vampires. But they don't die, and so. It's up to the public to expose them. We have to stop this engagement in the nonsense. You know what I mean? When Brzezinski comes forward and he talks about, well, the Russian strategy, and we've got to move, and just stop listening to the puppet show. Get away from it. Just say this person is a anthropologic weapon, and we have to ignore him. And we have to develop our own understanding of geopolitics and domestic finance. And we have to do it because we have to identify the people that are harvesting us, who are creating our culture and our media, mm-hmm. Giving us the fake reality.
Yeah, and behind his geostrategy and his advising the presidents and his involvement in the political process and all that, there's the entertainment complex that legitimizes it all too, because obviously, the action war movies of the 80s and 90s, the stuff all legitimized all this, all the war making that was really going on. Whether it's the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies or the Sly Stone movies, or so it's a whole entire complex. It's there to control it, whether what we get through entertainment, or even what we get through supposedly hard news, what we read.
Yeah, Schwarzenegger. I just want to comment that Schwarzenegger is your muscle building neocon.
Yeah.
I saw a picture of Schwarzenegger. He was arm in arm with Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Former mayor of New York, owner of the media conglomerate.
Is that when he had his SS belt buckle on or something?
Yeah, he has his belt buckle with the skull and bones on it. So you can, there it is, folks. If that should be, and incidentally, David Rothschild, when he blew into I think it was Santa Monica or someplace. He was getting on a boat called the Plastiki. Mm-hmm. He was taking some kind of eco-adventure tour across the Pacific. And they had pictures of him, and he had the same belt buckle on.
Really?
Yeah, the Skull and Bones. So, folks, it's just right in your damn face. You're slaves. And, they have different cul-de-sacs you can wander down, but you have to be, you can use this information both to help protect yourself and also to help organize, right? So. I would think that Tim, the thing that I would hope would come out of kind of the shows like the ones we put on and people who are influenced by them, hopefully, and or at least will, start the process to verify some of the stuff we talked about, is that they would say, what I can really do to rebel is to have a family. And then when I have the family, I'm not going to let the kids have any vaccines. I'm not going to give them any of this crap food. I'm going to really want them to be strong and healthy. Mm-hmm. And that's rebellion.
Yeah,
right?
That's the most successful rebellion because that can't be manipulated.
Yeah. Well, that also has a future.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's it's a difficult world to negotiate, but it's an impossible world to negotiate if you don't have an understanding of how the system is malevolent.
Yeah, I may not be able to stay out of the breadline, but at least I might have some understanding why I'm there, and that's the first step.
Well, it is, because then you can organize. See, if you don't even know why you're there, then you have no hope to organize because you don't know what to organize against.
Yeah.
I think that the kind of education that I would hope that people give to their children, first of all, is fractional reserve banking. Mm-hmm. That should be like, C spot run is the first sentence, and then the next is fractional reserve banking has no basis in capital fact, and it's hot air that you are enslaved by, something like that, so that the kindergartners can start with real understanding from the very beginning. And, if they're trained like that, then when they get into the public, because the mind control and the intimidation is everywhere, they don't speak up because everyone is just you're such a crank, you're against the banks. What's wrong with you? Someone who's trained properly will know that you're dealing with robots and you have to speak up as that human voice to try to get the robots to basically start to regain their humanity.
Well, I wouldn't have that a lot when we're talking about the banking or something, or just the ubiquitous, corruption. And people will say, well, you just think everything is corrupt. Well, it is. It is. I'm sorry. I didn't make it. I didn't create the system. I'm just, if you try to pin them down on a particular point, you see their eyes glaze over, they lose patience, they don't want to listen, they just don't want to hear it because they literally put their hands over their ears and walk out of the room.
They really do. Well, Can I tell you? Okay, here's a week ago, I was at a party. I don't really get invited to many you can imagine, but they made the mistake of inviting me to this one, and so I was talking, and the guy, they're talking about fake news, and I said, well, what do you think is fake news? And he said, well, Pizzagate. He gave that as an example. Mm-hmm. And I said, why? And he goes, well, it's, a pedophile ring run out of a pizza parlor, And I said, well, there's more to it than that. I said, what do you think about like the WikiLeaks with Marina Abramovich, the spirit cooking? I said, do you know what that is? And they go, that's nothing, And I go, well, it's actually the cake of light from Aleister Crowley, who's a Satanist. And this would indicate that Hillary and Podesta are engaging in Satanist rituals. Mm-hmm. And this is literally what the guy said. He goes, I don't care if they're engaging in Satanist rituals. It's important to me is what they're funding. I swear to God, that actually happened. I don't care if they're engaging in Satanist ritual. And so, I thought about, well, maybe I should try to explain to them why you really don't want to have your leaders engaging in occult satanic rituals, because maybe that would mean they're not really who they're, claiming to be. Yeah. But I decided I would just, instead of that, have a glass of wine and and didn't go on with it. But you got to speak up, and I'm deciding I'm going to even gear it up, more at like social gatherings.
Well, I mean, you can have a Speaker of the House being exposed as a serial, sex offender, child, well, he went after teenagers, so somebody said that's not pedophilia. But anyway, obviously he's a sexual lech and a pervert. He can rise all the way to the Speaker of the House of Representatives without being exposed until he's out of power, which says something right there. His shelf life had expired, and maybe someone within a deep state decided to expose him for some reason or another. But the point is, I mean, he didn't arise to that lofty position despite his pedophilia. He rose to it because of it. And there's a system there.
Yeah.
It's human compromise, and just look. That's how the system works. It was what was his name? The lawyer for McCarthy.
Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn. He was
the master at the entangling people with dirty pictures and things.
Exactly, and he was, as a defense lawyer, he never asked his client the facts of the case, whether he's guilty or not, or anything like that. His first question was, "Who's the judge?"
Yeah.
Because if we can get a judge where you got something on, then we're in good shape, and that's how the system works.
Pretty much, and so.
And I mean, my point is that feeds this conveyor belt of children that are being raped and sacrificed. At least that's part of it. There's more to it than that.
Boy, that's but that's really true, Tim. You're right, and that is kind of how it starts there, and then it just rolls downhill to this point now. Maybe we should do a show sometime on the missing children. I mean, just people are, because the media won't pick up on this story, but some of the data I'm getting from independent sources is just horrifying.
Yeah, and with disrupted communities, broken families, the more victims. And
yeah, for sure.
And so that's all part of the sinister logic in all these things.
Yep.
So. Okay, well, Joe,
all right, Tim. Well, gee, it was so good to talk to you. I will. We'll talk next week, and one of the things I'm hoping to talk about next week is Elvis Presley.
Elvis Presley.
Yeah,
the king.
I think he's. I'll send you some data on him, and but we don't have to focus on him. But I do want to start talking about him a little bit, because I think he's an important transition, mind control individual that people should kind of know more about. I'll just tell you one little tidbit about him. EMI had this humor where they have a dog listening to a gramophone, and underneath it was the words "his master's voice." Mm-hmm. Now, when you know that the whole company was, basically Tavistock and and British intelligence, and all engaged in the MK Ultra, the humor is just transparent. I mean, the dog is the young people, and his master's voice, is just the propaganda. Well, Elvis had that on his belt buckle. Yeah, his master's voice. So anyway, next week, Tim, we'll have a whole hunk of burning information.
Okay, good. Sounds good. Okay.
All right, brother.
Well, Joe, enjoy the week, and we'll talk then.
Yeah, you too. We'll talk again next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.